Good day and welcome to the Deals Webcast, navigating the dueling perspectives of business in a post-pandemic world. At the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, companies were presented with unprecedented roadblocks to doing business. Face-to-face meetings became impossible, especially across borders. In response, the corporate, private equity, and banking worlds relied on interactive virtual tools to maintain important relationships and navigate deals. Today, as these organizations consider their business interactions in a post-pandemic world, new challenges are arising. Workforces are split between a desire to get back to the office and retain the freedom of the work from home lifestyle. Some firms are urging employees to prepare for a return, while others are touting continued remote working capabilities as a competitive advantage. Today, we are presenting this webcast in conjunction with Williams Lea, who has surveyed the market in an effort to solve some of the most critical shortcomings in virtual and in-person transaction processes. My name is Eric Salvarezza. I am the Senior Program Director here at The Deal. And before we get started with the session, I just want to take care of a few quick housekeeping notes. First off, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Williams Lea. We wouldn't be able to do this event without your expertise, insight, and support. So we thank you for working with us on this. And I'd also like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. For the audience, we'll be taking audience questions. So in order to ask a question, just simply click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type your question into the box, and that's going to come in directly to our speakers. Please feel free to enter your question at any point throughout the discussion, as we'll be taking audience questions throughout. Also note that there's an upvote feature in the Q&A, so if you see a question that you like that was asked by someone else, just click that thumbs up button and that's going to move that up to the top. I'd also like to mention that we will be recording this session today and posting it on the Deal's website by tomorrow. So the video will be available for on-demand viewing for you to watch later, or you can share this with any colleagues who you think might be interested in this discussion. Okay, so we'll get started with our session, and at this point I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Tom Terrarosa, Senior Editor here at The Deal, who's going to be our moderator today. And Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you everybody for joining us today. As Eric mentioned, we've gathered a group of industry experts here to discuss some quite unique challenges. We've noticed a little bit of a dueling perspective situation coming out of the pandemic's worst moments as we look forward towards doing deals in a post-pandemic era. We've brought today on with us Greenhill Managing Director and CEO of Investment Banking, Patrick; Morgan Stanley Managing Director, Edward Manheimer; Blackrock Managing Director, Adi Blum; and Williams Lea Managing Director, Ed Rasmussen. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us today. It's really helpful to have you all on to discuss this topic. So I want to start by asking everyone to just introduce themselves, tell the audience a little bit about what you do. Let's start with Patrick.
Sure, thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, my name's Patrick Suehnholz. I'm a managing director at Greenhill and the COO of our investment banking operations. Greenhill is a advisory-only investment bank covering M&A, financing, restructuring, and private capital services globally. We have 15 offices and about 350 people. I've been with the firm for 10 years, most of that time as an industry generalist, and lately I've been spending most of my client time covering private equity, but most of my day is spent thinking about the exact questions that were raised at the outset here in terms of our workforce and our resources and how we make sure that bankers have the tools and the opportunity to get deals done.
So I'm sure it's never before been this complicated, those questions. Let's go on to Adi next.
Great, thanks, Tom. Good to be with you all today. Yeah, so I again, my name's Adi Blum. I'm in the infrastructure fund within Blackrock. So we're on the private side of Blackrock. We invest in infrastructure around the world. whether it's power plants, pipelines, renewable energies. What I do is I go out and look for new investment opportunities. Much of what we do is through partnership. So that's really developing relationships with strategic partners, creating potential joint ventures, and then executing investments and then managing them through a board role. So the past year and a half has certainly flipped on its head the way we previously went about work. And I think, as we'll talk about, there's much positive that we've experienced in terms of efficiency gains, but also some things that have been lost in the process. So, it'll be interesting to see the hybrid path and going forward, but looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Adi. And Eddie, how about you and Morgan Stanley?
All right. Hey, Tom. Thanks a lot. Really appreciative of the opportunity to speak today, and excited to join my fellow panelists. So I'm Eddie Manheimer. I'm a managing director at Morgan Stanley in our power and utility group in the investment bank, and I head up North American power, utility, and renewables M&A. I've been a Morgan Stanley employee for 13 years, basically my entire investment banking career. And prior to that, I was a corporate attorney for a few years. I would note, up front, that anything that I say is my own opinion. So I'm not speaking for the firm, and I'm not stating any current or future policies of the firm. I just want to make that clear in case any management is watching. But I think as Adi mentioned, it's been a very traumatic, very difficult period, in the country and in the world. And I hope that we can find really some benefits amongst this very difficult time that we can apply to the future, and hopefully learn from the experience that we've all been forced to go through. So I'm looking forward to discussing that today.
Thank you, Eddie, and we're happy to have you. And Ed, you're the glue that has brought us all together here today. Can you tell us a little about your role?
Sure. Ed Rasmussen. I'm the Global Managing Director for Financial and Professional Services vertical for Williams Lea. I'm a member of our firm's executive committee. I've been with the business for 21 years. And for the audience unfamiliar with Williams Lea, we provide a range of business support services. We have over 79 financial institutional clients, including bulge brackets, super regionals, middle markets, boutiques, private equity firms. And we operate in over 150 different countries, 6,000 employees globally. And our services that we provide to investment banks are present creative, information research, virtual admins, print and distribution of those pitch books. So if you think about it, anything that sort of goes into a pitch book and the support centered around it for our client base. And pleased to be here with this panel and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks as well. So Adi, you mentioned it, so I'm going to start with you. You kind of talked a little bit about some of the good, some of the bad. Let's talk at a high level about the good, the bad, the ugly of deal making in the COVID-19 era. We did a survey that looked at folks' opinions of their pitch processes, how those have gone, as well as processes for auctions and other transactional services. So what do you think has worked really well? And on the other side, you said there's been some things that haven't been as efficient. Maybe go through some of those as well.
Yeah, certainly. So I guess at the beginning, there was a concern amongst the business community that, people are at home and, are they really working? And, can we track what people are doing and so on? And I think that was flipped on its head when the community soon realized that everyone's working harder than ever. And I think it was a function of, in my mind, being able to just, A, you cut out the commute time, but B, we're able to schedule in shorter increments. So you could fill your day with 30 or 60-minute Zoom conversations, and so fit more into a day. Whereas if you were traveling to another country, that would take 2 or 3 days, and you would have a few meetings out of that, or maybe even 1 or 2 meetings. So I'd say from an efficiency perspective, there were some positives, but also learning how to manage one's mental health and that, and learning when and how to flip off, which I myself have not done a great job at, and still need to learn better. And then I would say where one had existing relationships, those are the ones where we saw the best prospects for collaboration, and where there was already trust and understanding of what different parties could bring to the table. Whereas developing new relationships was a lot more challenging, because it's harder to do that when you're not in person. I could talk about this a little later, where we were able to get a complicated investment done. We signed it in September of last year and closed it in December. And a lot of technology and interactivity went into that. But on the flip side, there were some investments that should have gotten done and didn't. And I think those were a function of not being able to all be in a room and just be able to work things out. So definitely a lot of learnings but things too that we'll be able to take with us to improve how we go about the work and life going forward.
And I can jump in here as well, Tom. I mean, I think I agree with everything Adi said. I mean, the reality is a lot of the components of deal making, have been occurring in a virtual environment for a long time. And while it still happens, and certainly as Adi mentioned, it can be helpful to get parties together to hammer out details and get the deal done. We've been doing deals over conference calls for many years, and now Zoom has entered the fray, and that's worked well, and I think will continue to work well. I think on the relationship side, there's just no substitute for real face-to-face interaction. At the end of the day, that's a key element of all these businesses is trust and relationships. And so while our velocity of coverage has increased, as Adi mentioned, the lack of travel has created efficiency gains. And so we can have more meetings. There's a hard to quantify, sort of hard to define personal element of meetings and relationship building that's challenging to port to a virtual environment.
That's exactly, Pat. I'll let you jump in. I think you have an interesting perspective here from the operations side. Eddie just kind of talked about the increasing efficiency from being able to put more meetings on the calendar versus that unquantifiable certain environment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think first what I would say is that the ability to be more efficient, I think, is actually what you're seeing play out in the volumes that we're seeing in the M&A world, because management teams are able to host all their management meetings back to back to back. It takes one day, as opposed to you used to have to, in a deal process, schedule sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, because you had different parties into the office. You didn't want them to see each other. Now you could jump from one Zoom to another and get your management meetings done in a sale process in a matter of days. And so that has sped up I think the velocity of deals, the timeline for getting to the end of a deal process. And I think, frankly, a lot of the industry likes that, in that you don't have to waste all that time for a process like that. But we've also seen, and we've seen a willingness of our teams to jump into more situations because it's easier. It's a marginal commitment to take one more Zoom on in a day. So people are overstretching themselves by adding more processes, saying, oh, I can juggle 4 processes at the same time, 5, 6, because it's just one more Zoom. And that's all well and good for deal volumes, and which is a lifeblood of our industry, but it has taken a real toll on an operational standpoint from a people perspective. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but Tom, we can I can save some of that. But while it's nice to be able to invite junior teams to a Zoom that they can join that maybe they wouldn't have been able to fly previously, they've now got 6 meetings in a day they have to prep the books for. It's just a problem of getting good work done in the appropriate amount of time to have that many meetings of substance in one day. And so on the downside of the same coin, or the flip side of the same coin, is that I do think sometimes by taking on more meetings, people aren't necessarily always as serious. So you have to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. And we've seen that. And you can kind of see it sometimes in a Zoom where somebody is in their car or, didn't really get dressed for it. It kind of gives you a sense of how important they view your Zoom meeting. Maybe they're just taking it while they're walking their dog. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was very hard to know that you were getting the attention of the people you're pitching to or trying to build a new relationship with when you can hear a lot of stuff or see, in this case, a lot of stuff going on in the background. So, I agree with everything that has been said previously. And, I think while there's a lot of benefits, there's definitely some downside as well.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that, I think, as well as we talk about, some of the topics we have at hand. Don't steal too many of my questions out of my mouth, Pat. But Ed, I want to hear your perspective as to what's been really working well for you guys. You've put together a product suite that, probably is very important to some of the folks on this call. And so just want to hear your thoughts as to what's really worked well and what maybe hasn't been clicking as well.
Sure. So, we've sort of viewed COVID-19 in sort of three segments. React and stabilize our client operations, move to a BAU sort of remote environment, and then form plan ahead committee and sort of place our bets and investments in a post COVID-19 and sort of form that business strategy. So as the world sort of locked down, we enacted our BCP plans, which always enabled remote access, and most of our services were offsite or offshore for many of our clients. So from a services perspective, we were already virtual, but really within 24 hours, we just kept the work flowing through our teams. It was really seamless to our clients, and then really within 5 to 7 business days, we were up to capacity. Sending work from home kits. So what's worked really well is there was no service disruption and against other events such as Superstore and Standy, where BCP, not only were offices down, but the BCP sites were down as well because they might have been within a few miles. So we were up and running. There was no disruption. And then through our Engage platform, which is our workflow, production, and analytics, we could monitor sort of all of our remote staff in real time, which also allowed for business productivity increases because now our staff wasn't commuting. So, we have 1,000 FTEs just creating pitch books. You can build in 2,000 hours extra capacity for the removal of their commute. Or, we were typically confined to a ring-fenced environment based on our clients. So we would run 24/7, 3 people on one workstation. You now had 3 people working at home. Individuals who worked in a daytime or another time zone could put in the extra hours quite easily. But conversely, now we're seeing that effect of, that efficiency isn't sustainable, the 10, 12, 15-hour days. As things open up, people would work because they couldn't go to the movies at night. And, hey, I'll jump on and support our clients during peak hours. And as we return to office, that'll slowly move away. But it's been an interesting journey. And now we're pivoting to plan ahead of, what does this environment in a go forward basis, and we're seeing a swing of different clients around, what they want to see from a return to office perspective, which I know we'll get into later.
Well, absolutely, and this is why this is such an interesting time and such an interesting panel to have on here with all your perspectives. Because I'm not going to name names. We all know who's saying what in the actual public atmosphere. But, you have large banks saying we need our junior analysts to have a certain level of hours per the work week to get the vital experience they need, and with everybody kind of confirming here that everybody's been working more hours than you'd ever imagine, you wonder, kind of what that has to do with going back, not continuing remotely, things like that. So not to make this about, work from home versus work remotely, but, it's obviously a natural element. So, I want to talk a little bit about our survey. We surveyed, deal-makers across the spectrum, analysts, managing directors, COOs, a slight majority of the folks that we talked to, that we surveyed actually said, transactional services processes have been more efficient, which kind of speaks to a lot of what you're saying. You're able to get more folks at, hands on deck at all times. but almost 40% said it's been about the same in terms of time and effort spent, and then there's a slight majority that said it's been a slight minority that said it's less efficient. I guess the question that comes out of that for me is just, are we going to see any specific virtual elements of deal making as well as virtual elements of pitch processes continue? Maybe on certain sides of the deal spectrum, you don't need to have as much face-to-face time as you used to have. Or at the end of the day, are we going to kind of follow the corporate parent leadership, the old guard ways, where some staunch supporters of everything needs to be done the way we've been doing it for a long time, obviously with the exception of technological advancements, but return to a fully in-person workflow, return to the things that were working really well right before the pandemic. I guess, Pat, let me put that question to you first. What do you think, what will carry over?
Well, I think to Eddie's point earlier, there's a lot in deal processes and kind of the guts of deal processes that was already virtualized between data rooms and conference calls. And I think that Zoom just adds a layer of being able to virtualize a lot of the process meetings that once a deal is already in motion, it just helps you. Frankly, I think in some ways it's better. You can kind of see people where it used to be a conference call, and you definitely don't have to travel for certain types of diligence meetings anymore. So in a process, I think we're going to retain a lot of Zoom and other services like that. I think, though, from a pitch perspective, while it was great to have these tools when you couldn't travel, being in the room, we think is just far more effective, and something that Zoom, as soon as the competitor isn't going to be in the room, you're just never going to not want to be in the room for a pitch as well. And we saw that. I personally was on a pitch virtual pitch a few months ago, where, again, not calling out any of my own team, but certain bankers sort of showed up. One showed up in a hooded sweatshirt and maybe didn't seem like it was taking it as serious as if they'd flown halfway across the country and put on a suit and actually sat in the room. And I think the other side of our clients, our potential clients, can feel that. So from a winning business and generating business perspective, I think you're going to see a return, to your question specifically, Tom, to the old ways, snap back really hard. But on a process perspective, I don't think anybody wants to travel any more than they have to for just a process meeting. So I think we'll see a lot of that stick.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Patrick said. I would slice it even more finely, which is, the old, regular way coverage conversations that occurred over the phone, those probably migrate to Zoom. And, you put the deck on the screen and walk through it, and perhaps there are some, fun new elements that get incorporated in terms of multimedia, which I know we're going to talk about later. But, I do think for most pitches for new business, and even some important, dialogue, or just, regular way dialogue, there's still going to be a lot of travel. And I think it's going to be driven by competition, but also just, I think there's an element, again, that's hard to quantify, hard to explain, about being in the same room with somebody else and having a frank conversation, that doesn't translate as easily to Zoom.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I might paint a little different spin on it. In that first, totally agree that the bar for travel is going to be a lot higher. And I think back, I was on a plane all the time, and often to other countries, and it's very draining. So I've thought through which kind of trips I won't need to take in the future. And it's really the ones I think, whereas again, this goes back to maintaining the relationship versus developing new relationships. Maybe less of the travel related to maintaining, though you certainly do need to be in front of people periodically. One element, though, that I found interesting was I actually found it easier to get the C-level attention over Zoom than in an in-person meeting. It required less of an investment, smaller chunk of time, easier to just hop on Zoom. So I think there'll be, certainly that element that remains from a new origination standpoint. And one other thing I'll say is something that's really accelerated has been DocuSign. And I spend so much time just signing documents for all sorts of different holding companies, and it's nice to have that part much more automated these days.
And I would just add, following up on Adi's point, something that it sparked was that there will also be a bit of a hybrid here too for pitch, where given a lot of offices are adopting the same tools to have Zoom in conference rooms, or maybe they wouldn't have had it previously. I think we've also seen a number of situations where, a small team, like let's say we have a Chicago office, say the pitch is in Chicago, some people will go in person, but now you can actually bring 6, 7, 8 other people from around the world or around the country into that room. So you get both the benefits of both being there in person and the benefits of having a broader team be able to be there, participate. And it kind of feels like a pseudo real interaction, and especially great for cross-border deals or our international offices. It's been much easier to spend time with people in our team in Europe and in Asia, which again, they were always just a phone call away, but something about Zoom makes it feel like a higher quality time internally.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is, what's fascinating about this time is that there will be a new equilibrium, a new sort of standard set of business practices. And it's very hard to assess that from where we sit today, because we're sort of in the middle of that development. I think in a year from now, we'll have a much better sense of how this all settles out.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like, as I said, there was a slight group of individuals from the 20% or so of survey respondents who said it was less efficient. I think a lot of this has to do with what you guys are talking about. The obvious answers, from the drivers of that perspective, might be kind of the what you're all kind of discussing here in terms of the slight nuanced things that come out of the deal process. So Ed, I don't know if you had any perspectives on kind of, where you're spending more time or less time, what's more efficient in your workflow?
Sure. So what's actually been a real benefit from the COVID environment and Zoom meetings, actually from our account management teams, it is with more client engagement. So sort of the quarterly trips to London, you can do them on a monthly basis, or colleagues in Asia Pac, stakeholders in Asia Pac. Many of our operations are global, so it's been a much more fluid process to get people together. And there is something about being on video as opposed to a phone, and just with less travel, that's really accommodated us being able to engage our clients and hear feedback more directly, and then sort of put that back into our operations, and also engaging at the user level. So, we've had more engagement with business unit managers, the analysts, because they've had a bit more time, or I should say less travel, and they've accommodated us, our services teams, time to say, here's the feedback. So that's really allowed us to sort of fine tune our operations in a more remote environment to say, this is the direct feedback we're getting, as opposed to, just the normal standardized meetings from, an enterprise services stakeholder who holds our contract. So it's been incredibly beneficial to us as a business to be able to directly to go to people such as the panel themselves and say, how can we provide better service? How's it going? We've had a lot more opportunity for that engagement. So that's been a real positive for us.
Okay. So, so far in 2021, deal making has absolutely exploded. It looks like Refinitiv data out earlier this month. I'm sure you all saw it. $1.5 trillion in deal activity. And even a lot of that might be some of what we're talking about here in terms of kind of easing on some restrictions that have allowed you to do a little bit of the elements of your past processes. But also, if you look back into the second half of 2020, that was once we got past once we realized the world wasn't ending, we figured out a way to work in this environment, and from the numbers so far over the past 12 months, quite well. So I guess, if we're able to put these numbers out with most people working in these new processes, these new remote environments, travel still slightly restricted, and cross-border deal not making as much of a deal flow, not making as much of an impact, why are you seeing some, the big bank CEOs saying, let's get right back to the office right now? Deal activity is up, T&E is down. Why are we running back to cram subway cars and skyscraper cubicles? Pat, Eddie, is it just because you can sell yourself better when you're able to sit down with somebody, over lunch or what have you?
Well, I won't speak for my CEO or any other CEOs, but I can tell you that all of the things that you mentioned are true. We've seen an explosion in deal activity. We've seen an increase in efficiency. So why change, I think is the question. And I think the answer is not being together in a business that requires a lot of apprenticeship, a lot of training and mentoring, and is problematic over the long run. And I think being together helps cement the culture, which is critical, at least from our perspective. It's critical to our operations and frankly our identity as an organization. And so we need to make sure that we're together in order to help fortify that strong culture that we have, and make sure that we're training the next generation in the appropriate way. I think we've done the best we can under the circumstances when we've been separated and communicating over Zoom. And I think the ability to transition to a virtual environment as seamlessly as we did, I think was just a tremendously positive surprise. However, internally, just like externally, there are certain elements that, I think require, or at least occur in a much more effective way when you're amongst each other.
Yeah, I would just jump in there and say that it's pre-COVID, a lot of our senior bankers were on the road 3, 4, 5 days a week anyway. So when we as an organization thought about getting back to the office, it was really focused on junior people who also tended not to have necessarily the space or resources to maybe be as effective from home. And so, we've been back in the office pretty much 100% in New York since early June. And obviously things are very different in different parts of the world. But here, everything that Eddie said, I absolutely agree with. I often say that in this business, there's no such thing as a virtuoso, right? Like nobody just at 16, 17, 18, like you can play the piano or basketball or paint or code, but you can't learn deal making just graduating from high school or college. You have to learn it. You have to be involved in it. You have to see it firsthand. And so getting those people back in the office and getting those teams together has been really important for that. It's also been just important for the junior teams from a camaraderie point. I think people felt really isolated, and that was starting to wear on mental health. I mean, the increase in activity, so more hours, more busyness, and more isolation, it was just a recipe for disaster. And frankly, our junior people were the most vocal about not coming back to the office. And they have now since been the most positive on the experience of coming back, because they get to see there's other people doing this job. I have peers I can ask questions. And a side piece to that too is also that everybody else being on a more normal schedule because of commutes and business hours has actually been better for their lives as well. It simply kind of compresses the day in a way that Adi at the outset said it. It's sort of the day had gotten away from everybody, and you're doing Zoom meetings at 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. And now with people doing their commutes and frankly, senior people having more social lives, the workday is compressed back into its boundaries to some degree, at least the critical mass is. And the junior people have, I think, really benefited from that and appreciated that.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, at the heart of it, I think it's important to remember that companies are really just collections of people, and people have an innate desire to be around each other and not work in silos. And I think we see the best results when there's collaboration and exchange of ideas. So yeah, and also this is really an apprenticeship business, as we said. So there has been, we saw this too, that there was hesitancy from junior folks on coming back, but I think there's the appreciation now of being together again. And it manifests itself in I mean, even for senior people, that there's a higher bar to reach out to somebody. It's like, should you email first to see if the person's available? Is it okay to call out of the blue? Versus just popping over to somebody's office or reaching over the cubicle. So just there's a lot can be lost sometimes in spinning wheels when you can just quickly collaborate and get an answer or get pointed in the right direction. So it's really those intangibles too that I think we're starting to get the benefit from again.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the communication in a COVID isolation environment had to be much more deliberate, and you could unless you were very focused on it, you could go weeks without talking to somebody who you would ordinarily be talking to almost every day. And so being back in the office and being able to have those informal interactions, that's an element of efficiency and cohesion as well that I think is sort of underappreciated.
I guess what I'm taking from all this is kind of that external relationships. Maybe you've navigated those a little bit better. It's internal relationships that you're working on, that you need that creative environment. You need to be able to, especially when it comes to junior team members, to be able to access them face to face on a day-to-day basis. It's a curiosity of mine. I think that our respondents, that classify themselves as analysts, overwhelmingly were in support of getting back to the office, or at least having access to clients in person. Getting back into an old style of doing things was a big yes from that group of respondents. So, but at the same time, I'd wonder, in terms of new market entrants and smaller banks trying to compete, I always wonder if there's going to be an element of, we can offer this flexibility that in terms of where you can work from, how you can work, the hours you can work, things like that. Is that something that's going into your thought processes, or maybe not your thought processes, but the higher ups, that what's the messaging from the top of your firm in terms of are we going to offer things that we wouldn't have offered, even though we realize that the young team members want to get back in the office. We might have to be a little bit more flexible overall to keep the talent levels as high as they possibly can be, and to keep competitors from encroaching. Either Pat. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. It's a really interesting question, Tom, and a really hard one, because as we've just all talked about, I think you could offer that to someone and they may see it as a perk, but I think that very quickly they would realize that it is hard to build and develop certain skill sets, never being in the office, being fully remote. We are very far from coming to any sort of long-term policy, and like Eddie said, we're kind of right in the middle of the game right now, so we're still feeling it out in terms of like a hybrid, as a having a little more flexibility on the margin. I think will certainly be necessary and will certainly be a selling point. How each firm is going to craft that, I think, is going to be it's going to take some time to figure that out. So we will have some of that, but you just have to make sure that we have to think 5, 10, 15 years down the line for the next generation of firm leaders. It's going to be really hard for somebody to work, say, remotely for 10 years and then all of a sudden come in and lead the organization the way we've chosen to organize and build it. I think there are certain smaller entrants, you're right, that will basically kind of build on a virtual only model, and you've seen that in a lot of other industries. I think there certainly will be some of those, but time will have to tell in that area.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a little bit skeptical that could be a sustainable competitive advantage, because it's so easy to be, if that were actually something that really attracted talent, then everyone sort of gravitate towards it if it were effective from a business perspective. So, I think we'll see how this evolves. We'll see what takes shape in terms of what the new standards are. But I find it hard to believe that beyond sort of a, maybe a 1-year one-off, that's really going to be something that is a draw on a sustainable basis.
Okay. Absolutely. And, I have an audience question here that actually kind of on the follow makes sense to this one, especially when I think of, how you position yourselves doing cross-border deals going forward, the changes that could come up instead of acquiring businesses directly. Maybe there's more partnerships that go into how you do these things, because the changes of how we're doing deals. The question is, have you experienced a different dynamic between internal or national versus cross-border or international deals in this peculiar virtual period?
I can start with that. That's a really good question, and I alluded to it in some of my opening remarks, where we were the investment that we made, we partnered with Vopak, which is a Dutch company, but we worked with the U.S. team, and we purchased some inside the fence terminals and with Dow and their some of their Gulf Coast facilities. But that was a largely a domestic exercise. U.S. lawyers, U.S. accountants, and we were all pretty used to doing things on conference calls, as I think Eddie said earlier. We did utilize drones for site visits, and somebody was able to go and wore a camera that was live streamed to all of us. So some interesting innovation from that standpoint. But another investment that we should have gotten done was in Brazil, and it was a case where I really believe it would have we would have gotten it done had we all been able to get in a room and hash out the couple sticking points. But it was hard to arrange. The pandemic there was, we were sort of ships passing in the night, where while things heated up there, the pandemic was the severity was dying down here a little bit. So especially in cross-border situations and where there are more important cultural impacts, I think that's where it's really, really important to be with people, and that's where you build up trust. It's over dinner, it's over those long lunches where it's just you and the principal face to face, and you don't have the shield of lawyers and accountants, where messages often don't translate well.
And travel does also bring you into the same time zone too. So it's just a fact of life that if you're in very disparate time zones, there is sometimes like a circadian rhythm issue where people are just on different wavelengths. Even if they're in the same Zoom, it's harder than crossing borders. I was just going to say that I think a big thing that we've seen is that in cross-border deals that had physical assets, and like what Adi's talking about, like infrastructure, energy, real estate, it was significantly harder for people to get over that final hurdle in our experience than, say, businesses like software companies, other tech companies, media companies, where the assets are a little more intangible, and it was kind of easier to understand them in a virtual environment. So we found that some types of cross-border deals were a little easier to do than others. And then lastly, I would say also about the cultural divides sometimes can be bridged easier in person than over Zoom as well, whether it's language or just business custom. Definitely often easier to close that gap in a room. And I don't want to go back and talk, but I did want to say my comments about virtual work and hybrid models were really based on deal making, bankers, kind of frontline client facing people, right? There's a big difference between even other parts of our firm where I think there's very easily a certain back office functions that could be done 100% virtually. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record, so to speak, Tom.
Absolutely, but I wonder whether allowing that to happen creates a tension point within the organization that you've got a certain level of support staff. I was a couple weeks ago I was talking to a chemicals company general counsel who said their company, the CEO or the COO that recently had come on board had said that they he or she had a manufacturing background, had a plant level background, and as a result, they're not going to ask their employees who are working on the plant floor to come back, work full time, and have the support staff like general counsel and things like that come. So I do always wonder as to whether or not within banks you're having that same debate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this is part of. Oh, I was just going to say it's part of a longer trend though, that banks have sort of moved certain functions first out of Wall Street, then out of Manhattan entirely, then out of the greater metro area, then out of the United States. So like people were used to interacting with colleagues on a lot of those functions in other places. So whether it's an office in Dallas or somebody's home, it doesn't really change the workflow so much within the very specific confines of our industry. But I think you're right from like a plant floor versus upper management perspective. Yeah, that's a sort of a different tension with virtual working.
So, everyone here kind of agrees that in terms of the actual workflow, the way you're doing business may return a little bit, to the way it was pre-pandemic, but some virtual elements of the deal making that we've learned or we've adapted over the past 18 months, may continue to be in use, which makes sense. I guess we had another virtual webcast recently, and senior P professional expected early stage investments to continue to happen without much, face-to-face interaction. You could do those deals much easier, write a check without ever meeting a management team or whatnot. But later stage investors kind of getting back in in-person meetings more frequently. But what the question is specific to pitches. When we talk about, we wonder, have they become more creative, interactive, complex in the virtual environment, such as by adding more multimedia elements? And will you generally continue to spend the time that you've spent on those multimedia elements, on developing those very creative pitch platforms that you've used to kind of replace some of the face-to-face interactions that you've had? Or will you kind of abandon those because, our respondents said time, money, cost, effort spent, not worth developing as interactive a pitch product? So we're just curious in terms of, as you go to pitch clients, whether you're going to simplify drastically those products as you get back to kind of what you were doing before. I'm open to whoever wants to start on that one, Eddie or Adi or Patrick or Ed. Ed, sounds like you got one.
Sure, good to jump in there first. I think it's a trend we've seen as a service provider, particularly within Prez and Creative and DTP, always looking at sort of what we view as, presentations of the future, what applications, how engaging is the content. And, this probably started well before 2017, where we had many clients sort of looking to have smaller, less content within their pitch books. We saw some clients say, every pitch book has to be under 40 pages, standardized pages, when maybe from the first 12 introductory down to 8 or 6. But we've seen a real sort of pivot to wanting more shorter infographic storytelling content. And we've sort of reacted by trying to sort of automate all of sort of the quick turns, and then actually bring in new skill sets to actually get in earlier with the deal teams for management presentations, sort of the IPO pitches, the bake-offs, to generally change the content from sort of your standardized pitch book. So we've seen that moving in that direction for some time. COVID has sort of really pushed our clients for us to sort of push the envelope in that aspect as well. But I'm curious from the panel, sort of their views and thoughts on the pitch books themselves.
Anyone want to jump in and answer Ed's questions, Eddie or Adi?
I mean, maybe we're laggards from a technology perspective, but I actually don't see too much changing. I mean, the way we tend, just the way, you know, our engagement with partners tends to just be, you know, more brainstorming and collaborative, and we tend not to actually talk to materials that we send around. I mean, we send some overview materials and so on, but I think, you know, we can certainly always do better about, you know, improving our multimedia and web presence. I would say, you know, where we have spent a good amount of time on this has been engagement with our investors. So annual meetings, for instance, where we've had to pivot from doing those in person to doing those on the web. And you know, the first one we did, we all sort of presented, and it was a little awkward to just, you know, be talking for 20 minutes and then just passing on to the next person. So now the next iteration of that, we made it more collaborative and conversational between ourselves, and did, you know, more Q&A between us. So, you know, we're thinking about how to best engage our audiences in a virtual. I mean, even this, we're talking amongst ourselves, and there's attendees that we can't see. You know, I think there'll be evolution in terms of these types of forums as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question to see how this evolves. I mean, one of the things I would say is before the pandemic, and I think throughout the pandemic, we've tried to be more disciplined about pitch books in general, and, you know, have the conversation be much more, you know, a discussion, an interaction, rather than, you know, going through materials. Obviously, certain analytics heavy discussions need to rely on things on paper, but, you know, just because that's the way it works. But I think one of the benefits of Zoom has been allowing these conversations to happen, I think, in a way that, you know, isn't as easy over the phone, to be honest. It'll be interesting to see, though, now that we've sort of opened the Pandora's box of using Zoom regularly, are there effective and cost-effective ways to use that channel to, you know, have differentiated content be provided? We haven't really used it, but it's something that could certainly be considered.
Yeah, I would just say I don't think it's something that we're doing a ton of, and I don't know that we have the in-house capabilities to do a lot of multimedia regularly. But, you know, it has become, even when we've gone to physical meetings, there was just one yesterday where the clients didn't want physical books, right? So it had to be on the screen. They whether that was virus or environment related, it was just like, we don't want paper, right? So I do think that's probably a trend you're going to see, and therefore just the fact that it is digital, it enables you to do other things. We're not on the cutting edge of that right now as a firm, but I do think you'll see more and more meetings will have the opportunity for that.
That's interesting to hear. You know, the as kind of we've focused on. I'm conscious of the time here, so I want to get a few more into you all as we wrap up. Most of the conversation we've been having has kind of been focusing on, you know, managing this high deal flow environment. We've been in a very good environment, but obviously there's always the looming concern in the back of our minds that this is not, you know, always going to last. The pendulum swings the other way. We enter in a down market. You know, how are your firms preparing for that? If you want to start, Pat.
That's a tough one, Tom. I think we're still just trying to make as much hay while the sun's shining as we possibly can. I don't think we're not building you know, our umbrellas yet. We're more just we're trying to take advantage of a good market and be as active and helpful for our clients as we can be. And they, you know, the clients, there's a lot of deals that got done over the last few months, but there's a lot of deals that didn't, and people are looking at other options. And for every big, you know, auction that somebody wins, there's a lot of losers who then want to go out and find a similar business or another the next business up. So there's a lot of work to do, and we're still on the you know, the view that we're not starting to prepare for the downside yet.
Yeah, in our world and infrastructure land, I mean, we try to structure our investments to be resilient and to weather downturns. So that's a big part of the diligence process, running downside sensitivities on demand, capital markets and government actions, taxes, all sorts of different variables. So I would say there's just so much capital out there that needs to be put to work. It's creating the ultra competitive landscape that we see now. But that capital is going to still be out there even in a downturn. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of it gets worked through and how long it takes to deploy. And I think we're just going to continue to see more and more capital getting raised that will be continuing to search for yield.
Yeah, I mean, we have a restructuring business that will pick up when things happen. So we have a counterweight. So that's, you're going to be writing a lot more articles about restructuring someday, Tom. But that's we have that in our back pocket. But for now, I think M&A is still the hottest topic of the day.
Yeah, I have an oil and gas background, so I'm well familiar with that back and forth of the two heads of the serpent. So, absolutely. I mean, Ed, I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on how you're preparing for maybe a down market in what you do before we wrap up.
Sure. So we've always built in a level of flexibility into our teams, just because volumes across our client side are always relatively volatile. So we see peaks and troughs all the time. As a business, we've seen significant amount of growth just in the amount of deals that are being done. So really, it's been to offset that volume, through enhanced automation tools within our own platform, whether that's through a third party or tools that we'll construct ourselves, looking to automate workflows. And then obviously, if there's a downturn, we don't have the people reduction that would typically be required, because we can expand our capacity through a remote environment plus technology. So that's just sort of how we're positioning ourselves for both future growth and any sort of downturns in the market.
Okay. I wanted to ask one last one. A majority of correspondents that we surveyed found, security, firm-wide regulations, managing compliance, other authorization activities to be less effective as a result of the virtual deal making environment. From an operations perspective, maybe we'll start with Pat. Does an increase in hybrid working pose any new or increased challenges regarding your data security, management of MNPI? How's the firm safeguarding against this, and have you seen an impact on deal processes as a result?
I would say I don't think we've seen a big impact on deal process, because so much of the documentation was already digitized before this, and there were security features built into the documents, watermarks and tracking and things like that, and things only that were able to be viewed in a virtual data room. But from a internal operations side, our IT team did a fantastic job. But I mean, last March they were some of the busiest people that I've ever seen, trying to figure out how do we build resiliency for everybody now having, instead of 15 offices, now we had 350 offices, and they had to think about print controls and login and local Wi-Fi networks that people could get into. And there was just a ton of stuff. And thankfully, there's a lot of good products out there. And I think probably all of our organizations have very good teams who monitor that stuff. So from a technical side, it was a lot of work, but we made it work, and we feel very comfortable with what we have in place. There's definitely a practice perspective that was new, which is from the personnel side. Had people having conference calls and Zooms all day long in their living rooms with either roommates or family members or other people coming in and out that may not be aware of some of the sensitivity and confidentiality of the information that we talk about. And so that was the single biggest thing, was instructing our bankers and teaching them and being there to answer questions about how you maintain confidentiality if you're, especially true for some of our junior people who have roommates or are non-family members. It's and maybe sometimes work in the industry. Like, how do you not say something that they shouldn't hear. So that was our biggest, probably biggest concern. And that's where we spent the most time, just on education and training.
You mean my 2-year-old niece is not supposed to be debriefed on Blackrock's infrastructure spending?
Exactly. Exactly.
Ed, any thoughts to bring us out on how you're helping clients manage these security and compliance woes?
As I mentioned earlier, virtually all of our teams are client dedicated, ring fenced. We sit on our client infrastructure, and this has all been underpinned by our Engage platform, where now prior to COVID, we require data classification for every submission. So we know if our teams are working home or remotely, there's a total chain of custody, and they can see, do these slides have MMPI, confidential, private, or public information. So we get the total view of, from an InfoSec and compliance, what our team touches at any point within a pitch book. And then also our IT teams gaining our ISO certification for work from home policy, giving the work from home kits, making sure everyone's on a Williams Lea or client issued hardware and software, so that we can provide that visibility back to our clients.
Wonderful. So with that, I will conclude the conversation. It's been so wonderful having you all to discuss these topics. I could keep going for another hour. I know we've been going at it pretty strong, but thank you again, Patrick, Ed, Eddie, and Adi. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone. We appreciate you being with us today. And thanks again to Williams Lea for sponsoring this panel. I just want to remind everyone also that we did record the discussion today. We'll have this posted up on our site tomorrow, and you should be getting an email with that link, but feel free to share it with anyone that may have not been able to view this today. It will be up there on demand for viewing later on. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.